Please join me in welcoming Mr. Knight.
I wanted to say how excited I am to be back at Deerfield, a school that I loved as a student, one that I know to be far better and greater than it ever was when I was here. But I just wanted to give you my bona fides that I am, in fact, an actual class of 1985 member, and I think there may even be some class of 85 members, so if there's an 85 cheer that breaks out, you'll understand why in the room today. I can't come back to Deerfield without thinking about some of the faculty, particularly the arts faculty, who were so instrumental to my development as an architect. And I first want to recognize Timothy England, who taught drawing and painting here and was an extraordinary influence on me as a student and afterwards. Additionally, Dan Hodermarski, who was not just a football coach, but also was the core of the Deerfield arts faculty here, and really in many ways began the program at Deerfield. A lovely human being, devoted to students. And finally, to Robert Moorhead, who many of you may know. Here he is in all his splendor. Mr. Moorhead was to me an enormous mentor and great teacher for architecture, graphic design, and design generally. And I feel lucky because I've additionally gotten to know the newer faculty, though not as a student, but David Dickinson and now Mr. Payne are both outstanding, and others who are leading this visual arts curriculum here that I think is second to none. And all of these figures have, for me, loomed very large in my life as a teacher over the last 15 or so years, and I think back to not simply the lessons that they taught, but their demeanor and their commitment to students as being something that was utterly exemplary. So my life in architecture really got going upon my graduation from the Yale School of Architecture, and I had set out to work in Asia, which I had spent a good bit of time in traveling before, and I was fortunate to join a firm named Caesar Pelli & Associates, who were based in New Haven, Connecticut, and I embarked on a career of a variety of work in different types of places, which included high-rise office and hotel buildings, airport buildings, academic buildings, student centers, worship spaces. And in 2005, I formed my own office, Knight Architecture in New Haven. And we have focused on, among other things, urban regeneration projects in New Haven and New York City, such as urban housing, lofts, apartments. As a user, an admirer, and a practitioner of contemporary architecture, I can admit, I can self-diagnose that many architects suffer from an anxiety about the relationship of their work to that of the past. But I just want to recognize that I am most grateful for the liberation and the inspiration that has come to me, somewhat later in my career, I'll admit, with recognizing the value, the virtue, and the relevance of some traditional forms to address contemporary challenges. And I think a magnificent example of this can be found right here on the Deerfield campus. Comprised of structures spanning centuries, the Deerfield campus has been most deliberately and most indelibly formed by the architecture of Charles Platt and his sons William and Jeffrey during the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, who were responsible for the design of the main school building, the memorial building, the arms building, the classroom building, the dining hall, the gym, among many other structures on campus. And here I'm indebted to the scholarship of my friend Aaron Halfin and the photography of Robert Barnett, with whom I'm collaborating on a book about Deerfield called The Campus Guide. Let's simply look at Platt's quietly magnificent gymnasium building of 1932. I suggest the next time that you enter the gym, that you praise the quality of its construction and its aesthetic appeal, but that you also try to imagine that time before its construction, and the conditions that existed at the outset of the commission. Platt was hired by an academy that had really yet to emerge as a national leader, with comparatively modest resources, remembering, of course, that the Great Depression had only been a few years prior. Platt was tasked to provide very large interior spaces, things like basketball courts and such, rather unprecedented, and would certainly be using the most modern materials in order to do that, namely steel and reinforced concrete, for a program, for a type of uses that by and large were themselves rather new. Basketball, for instance, was not that old a game when this building was built, invented just down the road in Springfield. But I ask you just to think about the innovative and deft way in which Platt approached the project and approached the construction, recognizing, of course, the place of Deerfield and the nascent campus that was emerging in his hands and that had been constructed for quite a while when he first came here. He, for instance, sets the building back from Albany Road, which gives a prominence to it in a subtle way, but was certainly careful to push these very large programmatic elements back in the building so that it didn't overwhelm the space. He deploys a Anglo-colonial architecture, a Neo-Georgian architecture, which was certainly prevalent throughout the state of Massachusetts and was familiar in terms of the places that had been created for several centuries. And he makes clear reference to Renaissance architecture. In this case, it's a building by Giulio Romano that I think may be a precursor to this, but there are probably many, many. And of course, you all know from studying our history that Renaissance architecture itself is derived from Roman architecture, which is entirely derived from Greek architecture, which is entirely derived from Assyrian architecture. And so in citing this architecture, it's clear that Platt is mining a vein that goes back millennia, that's clothed in a more familiar language of Anglo-colonial architecture, but he himself transforms that to make it into a modern building for America in the 30s. So the 6th century philosopher, Heraclitus, noted that no man steps into the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he is not the same man. And I think it is the same with architecture. If Charles Platt had chosen and tried to build a Renaissance palazzo for Deerfield, it could never have worked. By virtue of the fact that he was designing in this place at this time for these people, the building takes on a unique, independent identity. And once one is no longer threatened, I think, by recognizing derivation, one is immediately liberated to adopt, transform, contradict, and otherwise deploy traditional form towards the challenges of current new time. And one only hopes that one does so with the artistry and imagination of people like Charles Platt and his work at Deerfield. So the lesson to me is that there is an enduring and inescapable value to the places that we all inhabit. And I think you all, I know you all, being born of this campus, being imprinted by this campus, will emerge into that world and bring forth enduring, sustainable, and beautiful places. So with that, I conclude. I think that I have a minute maybe for questions, which I'd be very happy to answer. And I thank you all, and I thank the Huffards again.